You know me, but you may not know him. When you look at him, you probably don't see a man who was run down and trampled by horses. If you do, you should go see your eye doctor. You probably can't tell either that he was someone who worried a lot. The horse thing and the anxiety are connected, by the way. Maybe you've heard that psalm that goes, "Do not fret, it only leads to evil." I can tell you it's true. His life until he met Jesus was one long and tiring fret. He was like Samson, chained to the millstone, turning that big round runner stone to grind grain. But his chains were resentment and anger. And unlike Samson, he wasn't strong. He was even weaker than weak Samson after he was fooled by Delilah and they cut his hair. That's right. His legs and his arms were useless. He was bedridden and paralyzed, unable to move his body. The only thing he could move was his mind, and it must have pushed thoughts around and around, worried, angry. I guess you could say he was paralyzed in body and mind, because this thinking led nowhere, and he was so stuck. But who wants to criticize a paralytic, am I right? When he shared his despair with friends and family, no one could blame him. All that potential, all that possibility, lying there with dormant and useless limbs. What were they to do? Add insult to injury and tell him to cheer up? He wasn't anything special before his accident, only special to me. I mean, he went to the synagogue on weekends, showed up for work through the week, did his best to follow the law, and made the sacrifices necessary to atone for the big stuff. A few turtle doves here and there, the occasional goat. But he wouldn't have called himself religious. I wouldn't either. Just full of zest for life. But all that zest was quickly zapped when he stepped in the path of a unit of Roman soldiers as they tore through a side street to squash an uproar near the temple. We were in the holy city for a festival. And what can I say? He was filled with fervor and passion and that energy you get when you're with people you love on the streets of the holy city. He probably felt invincible. And you'd think he was a high priest, the way people almost talked about him after the accident. A Hebrew of Hebrews who stood up to Rome, they'd say. He thought it would be the last stand he ever took. And so his bitterness and his anger were never really checked or challenged by those around him until he met Jesus, that is. At Christmas, we tend to use words like hope and peace and joy, as we very well should, but we often overlook the very reasons those words have such appeal in the first place. Until the advent of Jesus in his life, he lived on the other side of those words, in despair and the regret that tells you every day there is no reason to hope and no way to experience joy again. It was our friends who cut a hole in the roof and lowered his helpless body through it, plopped him right in front of Jesus. You should have seen the look on his face, he told me. The surprise, he said, and dare I say, the profound respect he had for my friends for the bold move they made to get me in front of him. Some say they were motivated out of a guilt that their bones didn't get crushed during the events on the fateful day that turned him into a paralytic. But Jesus himself recognized they were moved by faith in him to heal. Then he added, the strangest thing that day was what Jesus said for everyone to hear. Friend, your sins are forgiven. I don't know what he expected precisely. I guess he wanted Jesus to reach out his hand and heal him. He said he imagined it 1,000 times ever since he heard of Jesus's miraculous power. But Jesus said what no one else would say. He was a sinner with a sickness that went so much deeper than his body, a man with a problem worse than failed limbs. Well, I think you know the rest of the story. Look at him. He walked out of there with a bed in his hands, his whole future ahead of him, restored and set free. The religious people were scandalized. Those hungry for righteousness had their needs met, and those with eyes to see saw the glory of God revealed. It's kind of a perfect Christmas story, isn't it? Suddenly, there's Jesus in the midst of humanity after all those dark days of despair, just as surprising as a grown man as he was as a baby. Emmanuel, God among us. And the force of the collision as the truth of who Jesus is impacts the human heart is more violent and more transformative than the impact of a charging Roman horse against the body. With a single word, Jesus can set you free from your sin and despair into what only can be described as true joy. He's no elegant or sophisticated man that desires or deserves God's grace, but he was given his grace anyway. Now he's away traveling and praising God and serving the Lord, leaving me to tell his story. And what a story. God's grace changed him forever. I hope you encounter Jesus' grace in a way that changes you this Advent season.